Hello and welcome to this online lesson. My name is Mr. Hoven, and today we're going to be looking at the business practices of the early industrialists and their impact on the workers. Just like we've been saying, the industrial growth in the late 1800s created many thousands of new jobs, yet factory workers paid a price for economic progress. As mass production increased, factories became larger and less personal. So the workers often worked in very poor working conditions. People worked in unsafe and unhealthy conditions. Accidents were common in factories and mines. They would work for 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So very, very long hours. They could be fired at any time for any reason. So they were replaceable because many lost their jobs to immigrants who were willing to work for less pay than they did. And at the heart of this were a lot of women and children. By 1900, more than 1 million women had joined the industrial workforce, along with hundreds of thousands of children under the age of 16 years old. Because there were no laws that regulated workers' salaries, women and children in general earned about half of what men did, if that. And child labor laws were ignored by most employers. A lot of people said, hey, you shouldn't be making children work this long, but they were ignored. So let's think about it. Wait, so why were women and children paid less than men? Well, some ideas could be, well, they're smaller. Maybe they're not as strong in some people's opinions, not as smart, and they're doing kind of the less desirable job, so they're going to be paid less. Again, it still did not make it right. And there were severe hazards in the workplace. Steel workers suffered severe burns from the machines they're working with and during the Bessemer process, and they were melting down the iron ore and mixing it with different chemicals to make steel. Coal miners died in cave-ins. They also had serious side effects from the gas fumes. When you're drilling down deep, there are gases in the earth that they were being exposed to, and coal dust was getting into their lungs and giving them lung cancer, emphysema, and things like that. And garment workers, if you see the picture here, worked in dangerous factories called sweatshops. A lot of times where they were put in dangerous situations in order to fix a machine, especially the children. And the one thing to remember, the biggest hazard for all of these jobs was the possibility of death. That's right. In every one of these jobs, the death or their mortality rate was very high. So again, unsafe working conditions. And there were several disasters that happened in factories, sweatshops, mines, but none like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. This occurred on March 25th, 1911. It was the deadliest industrial disaster in the history of New York City. At the end of the workday, or towards the end of the workday, a fire broke out on one of the floors, one of the higher floors, in a bin of cloth scraps. So what happens is in a shirtwaist, they're making cloth, they're making clothing, and the scraps are being thrown in these bins, and they would sit there for months and months. And some accounts say it was a lantern, some say it was a cigarette, others say it was a match, set off this big pile of scraps. So the women, obviously, are going to try to leave and get out. The women and the girls are trying to leave. Well, all the doors are locked to the stairways and exits by the owners. So every day they would lock the women and girls in to prevent them from taking breaks or from leaving. So the doors are all locked and the people who were outside had already ran out of the building. Some workers tried to use the fire escape, but because of the heat, it melted and collapsed, killing many of them. Workers jumped out of windows and down the elevator shaft to escape the inferno. So people were jumping out of the building and dying on the street. And by the end of this fire, 146 young women and girls died. This was a huge disaster, and it really brought to light the fact that working conditions were not fair, and they were not at all safe. So there became this need for workers to come together, for unionize. Dissatisfied workers organized into groups, labor unions, to demand better pay and working conditions from their employers. Again, their big two first demands were better pay and better working conditions. Early trade unions were ineffective because they only represented small groups of workers, and they weren't united. So again, the idea is there, we need to make changes, but at the same time, they weren't able to have a lot of progress because they weren't united and they weren't together. However, this began to change. In 1869, garment cutters in Philadelphia founded a trade union known as the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labor. Employers fired workers who joined these organizations, so the Knights met secretly and used special handshakes to identify or recognize one another. They're protecting each other's identity by meeting in secret. Under the leadership of Terence V. Powderly, the Knights of Labor became a national labor organization in the late 1800s. Unlike most unions, the Knights recruited people who were traditionally kept out of the trade unions, including women, African Americans, immigrants, and unskilled laborers. Helped them be successful because they were taking in everyone and making it a national labor union. This quickly grew to over 700,000 members by 1886. And they started the process of fighting for workers' rights in the best ways that they could. Another labor union that was created around this time was the American Federation of Labor. This was made up of national trade unions and represented skilled workers. They were led by Samuel Gompers, and he's the individual pictured here. They pressed for higher wages and shorter hours. One thing that was different about the American Federation of Labor, along with Samuel Gompers, was that he and they argued for collective bargaining, wherein unions could represent workers in labor discussions with management. And that's something that we have here today, such as the teachers union can meet, especially in contract negotiations, with the administration of the school and try to work out some bargaining or work out some deals. Both the American Federation of Labor and the Knights of Labor really worked to try to help the worker situation. However, a series of violent strikes and riots led them to be losing favor with the American people in the United States. So the unions started going on strike. The idea of that if you're not going to help us, we're going to go on strike, we're going to hold up your production, cost you money until you have to give in, or at least help meet us halfway with some of our demands. So the first one happened in Chicago with the Haymarket riot. A kind of small depression kind of hit in the 1870s in the United States, and this led business owners to cut wages, cut back on hours, again, taking money out of the hands of these workers. So workers at the McCormick Harvester Company gathered to protest killings of 4 strikers the previous day. So a day before, a bunch of strikers had been killed, and now they're coming to protest it. When the police ordered the crowd to break up, an unidentified person, we don't know who it was, threw a bomb that killed a police officer. Several more that killed in a riot that followed. And following the Haymarket riot, many Americans associated the labor movement with terrorism and violence, along with disorder. So again, the labor unions are losing favor with the American people. In the Pullman strike, the employees of George Pullman's railway car plant near Chicago went on strike in May 1894, when the company cut their wages. Pullman responded by closing the plant. 1 month later, workers in the American Railway Union, so that's the third union we're talking about, supported the strikers by refusing to handle Pullman cars. As a result, the rail traffic was paralyzed. You couldn't move any of the rail lines. Pullman and the railroad owners fought back with the help of the government. They persuaded General Richard Olney to obtain an injunction or court order to stop the union from obstructing the railways. Yet the union and its leader, Eugene V. Debs, refused to end the strike, and Debs was thrown in jail. It all ended, however, when Grover Cleveland, who was the president at the time, sent federal troops into Chicago, and soon the strike was over. The failure of the Pullman strike dealt another blow to the union movement. Again, they weren't being as successful as they'd like to be, and they're being associated with violence and terror. Despite these setbacks, however, the workers continued to organize to campaign for better wages and working conditions. And throughout history, they had quite a bit of success with their actions. That about wraps things up for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.